I'm happy to welcome Alexander Salter to the program. He's an economics professor at Texas Tech University and author of the new Reason.com piece, Is High Inflation the New Normal? Make sure to check that out. We'll tweet it out a little bit later on in the program. Alexander, how's it going?
Doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This is one of those topics. I think it is. We have a lot of stuff going on in the world, as we all know. But this is the thing I think that is hitting the American people the hardest right now, which is inflation. It's a difficult thing for the average person to understand and really be able to figure out what the recipe is that goes into this final dish. So how do you explain inflation and what's going on right now?
Absolutely. If I'm going to sum it up in one sentence, it's surging demand amidst lagging supply. Basically, there's a lot of purchasing power in the economy right now. That's driving up prices. But also there are problems in terms of turning intermediate goods into final goods and services. Energy prices, high. Semiconductors, hard to get. Transportation problems everywhere. When you have the combination of lots of purchasing power in the economy with nowhere really good for it to go in terms of a path, that's when you get the pipes clogged. That's when you get inflation. Okay,
so there's been a couple of proposed solutions, or I guess explanations for what we're going through right now. Let me go through a couple of these. Number one, the idea is that this is a transitory phenomenon. We're having a buildup because of sort of the fallout of the COVID era, and that's the main thing that's causing this right now. Do you buy that explanation?
Initially, I was sympathetic to the transitory explanation. You can't really reboot an economy the way that you reboot a computer. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. We're learning the hard way that getting back all those patterns of specialization and trade to work can take a lot of effort. And so that's part of the explanation. But the longer this goes on, I think that we have to fess up to the possibility that this is just a mainly, not entirely, but mainly a good old-fashioned demand-side inflationary event. We've had a lot of fiscal policy. We've had a lot of monetary policy. Now, at the time, there were good reasons for that. You might have wanted to have stabilized the economy during the darkest days of the COVID crisis. But again, at the end of the day, that purchasing power has to go somewhere, and it's going to drive up prices for goods and services. So while I think that the transitory explanation was plausible 6 months ago, 3 months ago, I think that we're looking at something that's unfortunately a little more durable now.
Now, you kind of touched on, I think, another one of these explanations that has come out, which is if there's going to be a demand side issue, part of that, obviously, coming out of the pandemic with all the money that we spent trillions and trillions of dollars to prop up the economy. As you mentioned, some of that made sense at the time, especially considering the restrictions that were being implemented. But how much is spending and these sort of giant government programs and giveaways to try to heal the economic wounds of the pandemic, how much of that is playing into the inflation numbers we're seeing now?
That's a great question, and that's something that economists don't even agree about amongst themselves. The usual view is that expansionary fiscal policy, basically government spending a ton of money, doesn't have too much of an effect on inflation. The usual place that we look is monetary policy. And to be clear, there's been a lot of new money creation. Over the course of the pandemic, the Fed's balance sheet went from something like $4.5 trillion to just shy of $9 trillion today. So that's a lot of new money creation. At the same time, we've never really had deficits ratchet up this fast, this quickly. So we're sort of off the edge of the map when it comes to fiscal policy too. So it might be the case that when economists look back and say, oh, look, deficits weren't all that inflationary when Reagan was president. Deficits weren't all that inflationary when Obama was president. Well, as a percentage of GDP, they weren't anywhere near as big as they are now. So it could be that we're sort of nearing uncharted territory, not just for monetary expansion, but fiscal expansion as well. Ultimately, it's some combination of the two.
I mean, I know this isn't literally modern monetary theory, but it seems like we're just sort of experimenting. We just decided, hey, let's give it a shot for a couple of years, see what happens. And I feel like we're seeing what happens.
We're learning the hard way what happens when you inject a ton of purchasing power into the economy without the actual goods and services there to back it up. Now, a lot of modern monetary theorists were acting kind of triumphant for a while because until comparatively recently, again, there had been a lot of money creation, a lot of fiscal policy, and not much inflation. All right, in the immediate months after the government intervention packages, we saw inflation still below 2%. And so that led a lot of people who subscribe to modern monetary theory say, look, we can run the printing presses. We can spend as much as we want and print the money to pay for it, either directly or indirectly, and inflation's not a problem. Inflation has once again reared its ugly head, and all of a sudden, all the modern monetary theorists have gotten rather quiet. I wonder why that is.
It is a shocking silence all of a sudden. Alexander, how do we turn this around? I mean, I see no evidence of a government that's going to decide to spend less money. I mean, it's just a question of how big is the increase. Maybe we can trim a little bit off the worst numbers we hear, but there's never any appetite, seemingly on either side of the aisle now, for cutting spending, for avoiding these gigantic infusions of cash into the economy, not to mention Fed policy. What do we do here?
It's always hard to get politicians to agree to a budget cut. Fortunately for us, I don't even think that we need to get to a budget cut. I think the immediate place to go with respect to fiscal policy is slow the rate of increase of spending. We don't even need to bring it down, but if we could take a couple of fractions of percentage points, 0.1%, maybe 1% off the growth rate, that would be a good signal to markets that we're getting serious about our fiscal future. Because in the long run, we don't actually need to completely balance the budget. All we need is for government spending to grow slower than economic growth. So as long as the rate at which we're churning out new goods and services, cars, TVs, laptops, all that good stuff, as long as that number is higher than the rate of growth of government spending, we're going to be okay. We're ultimately going to have the real goods and services necessary to back up all that purchasing power, and so we don't have to worry that much about inflation. On the monetary side, there's no getting around it. We got to shrink the balance sheet. We got to get something back to approximating normal monetary policy. Keep in mind that before the last crisis, right, not even the COVID crisis, but the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed's balance sheet was less than $1 trillion. So we've seen pretty much a tenfold increase in the Fed's balance sheet in half a generation. That's not sustainable, and I would argue that that's not prudent. We really need to get back to old school monetary policy where we're only buying and selling short-term public securities to stabilize markets for a short period of time. Bring back the 2006 playbook and we'll be okay.
That is a mind-blowing statistic, 1 trillion to 10 trillion. I mean, these are just, in that short of a time, it's just terrifying. I think people kind of understand how this stuff works when they look at, their own situations. I know that I just refinanced my mortgage on my house, and the reason I did that is because I'm afraid these rates are going to go up in the future. We may very well see that. It looks like we're going to see that later this month and ongoing into the future as they try to solve this problem. But what happens if this happens not to everyone's homes, but to the borrowing rates that our country has? We're going to wind up spending a larger and larger portion of our budget just on paying back previous interest, and it's going to get unsustainable pretty quickly.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. The real danger is if interest rates start going up, then all of those borrowing costs that we thought were negligible are suddenly going to bite. And if you think that partisanship is bad right now, if you think that political contest between the parties is a little bit of hardball right now, wait until we have even less real resources to devote to political objectives, just because we have to keep on paying more and more and more of it just to service the debt. If interest rates go up by even 1% higher than CBO expectations, that's trillions of dollars added to all public debt for the future for every generation that interest rate lasts. We're quickly running out of fiscal room. And again, with inflation running as high as it is, and with economic growth across the world continuing to trend upward, I think that we do have to face the fact that we're not going to get to have 1.5% interest rates on 10-year Treasury securities forever. We're going to get to normal interest rates sooner or later, and I would prefer that we have our fiscal house in order on the sooner side so we can be ready when it happens.
I think that's very good advice. Can you, for a second, talk to me about the inflation that's hitting everyday products, even these long-term products? I know I ordered a new car. I've had my car for 10 or 11 years. I ordered a new car 6 months ago. And to this day, they have not even emailed me to tell me the order has been pulled. There's like no potential for progress with this car. I may never see it. We're seeing this stuff build up all around the economy. Do we have any idea when the supply will catch up with demand?
It's anybody's guess. What we need is for three things to happen simultaneously. One, we need the transportation bottlenecks to lessen. I think that there's some optimism. I think that there's some reason to think that that's going to start getting better in the near future, even with the unfortunate conflict that's happening right now in Europe. Number two, energy prices. That's going to have an effect on pretty much everything because energy is a major input for virtually every good or service that we can consume. Unfortunately, this is where the conflict in Europe right now is really going to hurt. Because energy prices are set in a global market, you can't look at U.S. oil imports, for example, and say, oh, we're getting only 8% of our oil from Russia, or whatever the relevant statistic is. As soon as oil prices go up from anywhere, that's going to have an effect on global oil prices just based on how supply and demand works. So that's going to be something that we're really going to have to pay attention to. And the third thing that we need, and this might be the hardest of all, is again, that stable fiscal and monetary environment that we talked about at the beginning. We need people to be able to plan for the future. We need people to have reasonable expectations about what the purchasing power of their income is. Otherwise, they're not going to know how to budget over time. We need to give them that security, and that's something that only the public sector can do. They haven't been doing a good job of it. They've dropped the ball for at least 2 years. More likely far many more than 2 years, but we'll give them credit for the previous stuff. But if we can work towards fiscal and monetary normalization, that'll be 2 or 3 of those factors. We might just have to eat the high oil prices for a while. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I think we can live with it.
All right, Alexander, last one before I let you go. Scale of 1 to 10, how screwed are we?
I think we're sitting right about a 7. Okay. I think we're sitting right about a 7. And I would lower that number significantly if I saw any appetite for shrinking the Fed's balance sheet or for even slowing the rate of growth of government spending. And again, maybe policymakers will pleasantly surprise me. I would love to lower that down to a 4 or a 5. But again, we need 2 very difficult political things. We need both parties to agree to not spend as much as they otherwise would want. And we need central bankers to voluntarily step back from the outsized power that they've had on financial markets since really the 2008 crisis. Have you ever tried to get a bureaucrat to turn down power? Unlikely.
Yeah, it doesn't work out that well. Alexander Salter is an economics professor at Texas Tech University. Author of the new piece, Is High Inflation the New Normal? Let's hope not. You can find that over at reason.com. Alexander, thanks for coming on the program.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.